Well, thanks for your company here on Richo. A little while ago, an hour or two ago, I spoke to Michael Danby. Now, he's the federal member for Melbourne Ports. He's been in the parliament a long time. He's a prominent member of the Jewish community in Melbourne. And whenever you speak to him about the Middle East, it's always interesting, and so is this. Have a look. So Australia is still struggling with ISIL, ISIS, Daesh. Let's just call them Islamic State because it makes it easier for me. I at least understand that. Now, when you look at the radicalisation of children and that's happening, and they are children basically, and you see how they're getting younger and younger and younger. We had a 14-year-old question the other day about the tragedy in Parramatta. Obviously, if I'm looking as an Australian at our enemies, I see the biggest single enemy is Islamic State. No question about it. And for the last year, I've said, why not come to some arrangement with Assad, because he at least on the ground is fighting them. Apart from the Kurds, nobody else is, and I'm going to get onto the Kurds in a moment, one of the most wronged people in the world in my view. But why can't we come to some sort of arrangement and try and if we're both going to be fighting this terrible mob, why can't we come to an agreement with Assad for where he's fighting and where we're fighting?
Well, basically, Graham, I agree with your orientation. I think all Australians want to see that group of crucifiers and rapists and murderers and vandalisers of the ancient world, Daesh, roll back. But the problem is, and it's very clearly explained in a map that I've got here, that Daesh is in eastern Iraq, in eastern Syria, in the desert. The people that the Russians and Assad are taking on are the American-backed or Western-backed and sometimes Islamist people in the north and south of the west of Syria, the green areas that we've got on the map. And the problem is that they won't give up if Assad is part of the coalition. So actually, Assad has used Daesh against those people. Those people, the genuine sort of democratic revolution against the dictatorship of Assad, have actually been fighting Daesh. It's very complicated, I realise that, but if Assad is part of the coalition, and I'm not saying that a coalition involving the Syrian Alawi minority or the Christians couldn't be part of a future Syrian coalition, but the way the Iranians, Hezbollah and Mr Putin have it planned at the moment, it's only going to make the situation worse. Yes, the opposition supports action against Daesh in eastern Iraq, but if we support Mr Putin's bombing campaign, as our foreign minister has and says that Assad should be kept on, this is only going to exacerbate the fight. The non-Daesh people were actually just about to win, Graham. Assad was reduced to 20% of the territory. Or win the area that Assad was controlling.
Hang on, Wu. It seems you say that the non-ISIL people were about to win. There are more of al-Nusra than there are of these people you're talking about. I mean, they are a very small group. And in the end, is it not inevitable that the Syria we know today isn't going to exist? There will be a division. Surely, what the end result of this will be Assad keeping, let's say, a quarter or a third of the country, and some other setup for the rest. Because he's not going to hold the rest. There's no doubt he's lost so much ground. But it seems to me that the sort of people you're talking about supporting are their numbers are too small.
I don't think Assad will keep control of the country. I think there will be an Alawi enclave, which the Russians will guarantee. But the problem is, Graham, is that there are 1.5 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon, 2 million in Turkey and 800,000 in Jordan. And they thought they were coming back to Syria when Assad was defeated and they could go back to their villages and towns, which he's been barrel bombing for the last 2 years. As soon as the Russians invaded, this is why you had that poor little boy washed up on the beach in Turkey. The Syrian refugees in all of these places, including Turkey, thought to themselves, well, we're never going back now. We have to go further on to Europe and flee to there. The Russian and Iranian moves in Syria make things worse. And it's not just me that's now saying it. I think the Americans and British have taken part of what you said in the introduction about the Kurds seriously. You'll notice that the Americans did a raid with the Kurds on Raqqa the other day and freed 80 people who are about to be executed. And the British SAS are now training the Kurds, the Peshmerga, the only people who are willing to fight and get rid of ISIS on the ground in Kurdistan, in Erbil. We had a visit to Canberra the other day, Graham, of the Kurdish foreign minister, and I basically think rather than training the Iraqi army, which doesn't seem much seem to have much fight in it, and working with their boss, the Iranian General Soleimani, we should be training the Kurds. There's a lot of them that are unarmed and untrained. I think Australian trainers are the best in the world, and they're only 50 miles from Raqqa.
But
they're only 50 miles from Raqqa.
I understand
so you're concerned, Graham, about Raqqa. We should be going down there and cleaning them out.
Absolutely, I'm 100% in favour of that, but the difficulty is you've got to clean them out of a lot of places like Mosul and places where there's going to be house-to-house fighting, let alone street-to-street. It's going to be incredibly difficult. But when I look at how do I work out a solution here, you've got a Sunni terrorist group massacring not only the Shias, but also because any Sunni who doesn't agree with them, they just kill them or whatever. But
and the Christians
and the
Yazidis.
Yeah, that's right. Anybody
and selling Yazidi women like sex slaves.
That's right.
Selling Yazidi women as sex slaves.
Not just Yazidi women. They've done it with others. But just moving on from that point, how do you get a settlement over there if you don't look at those Shias? And if you look at the Shias, inevitably at some point you deal with Iran, don't you? You don't have a choice.
Well, I think if you establish Iran in power from Lebanon all the way through to Iran, you're making the situation worse. I think we need to work with our Kurdish friends. I think there's one problem of working with the so-called Iraqi army to drive back Daesh out of Iraq. But this is not going to be done. Americans seem to have a fondness for desultory bombing campaigns. They never work unless we have some people on the ground. The Kurds with Arab allies down in Raqqa, we're not going to have this problem. And Graham, as you said in the intro, it's very much an Australian problem because the orders for these deluded young fanaticised jihadists in Australia come from terrible people like that Neil Prakash, Al-Cambodia as he's called, and on the phone to 14-year-old kids in London, on the internet to 18-year-old kids in Melbourne, and they were planning to do what they're doing in Jerusalem, to run down someone at the Anzac Day parade and then to cut the police officer's head off. What a horrible thing that would have been if they would have been successful. Thank heavens ASIO and Co had sort of one step ahead of the pack.
Michael, let's get back to stopping them on the ground. I don't see, as an example, just look at Iraq. I take Syria out of the equation for the moment, just look at Iraq. On the ground there, it's going to be the Shia militias, who are often Iranian-led, armed and inspired, who are going to take up much of the fight, because you're right, the Iraqi army is useless, absolutely useless, and have no stomach for the fight, no heart for the fight, walk away all the time. So don't you have to deal with those militias? If you don't, I don't see how you stop these evil people on the ground.
Graham, the strategy we had before Barack Obama withdrew the 10,000 American troops was we had Western troops there giving stiffening to the Iraqi army, and we paid the Sunni tribes in Western Iraq hundreds of thousands of dollars to suppress what was then Al-Qaeda, has now morphed into Daesh. I think that's a sounder strategy. I do not believe forcing Shia people into a mainly Sunni land in the western part of Iraq is a sound strategy. I agree with the general sentiment that people have that we've gone from over-aggression with Bush and Rumsfeld to over-passivity under the current American administration, but going for a cheap Iranian solution where we force Shia people into a Sunni 80% majority country, Syria, or in the western part of Iraq, which is majority Sunni, is not a solution either.
Well, I'm desperately looking for a solution, as are most people, because I just don't think we've found one. But one thing's for certain, where we can agree is the Peshmerga, who've had some success fighting the Islamic State on the ground. They're the only group that really has. And yet, of course, the Turks regard them as terrorists, and they don't have a proper country of their own. When will we ever see a chunk of Iraq, a chunk of Syria and a chunk of Turkey to form some sort of proper Kurdish homeland?
The Kurds are very smart, Graham. That bloke who was in Canberra last week, they don't want an immediate Kurdish homeland. They're building up to it. They want to work with us and even with the government of Iraq to build up their own independent regional government, and they want training and military assistance to fight Daesh, who have persecuted them like they've persecuted the Shia and the Christian people of Iraq. Weren't they heroic standing there in Kobani by themselves against IS and fought almost to the last man?
That's
until
right. While the Turks
finally relented and led
while the Turks watched from the hills with all their tanks lined up with the guns silent.
Disgraceful. It was almost like the Russians waiting on the edge of Warsaw while the Polish Home Army rose and they let the SS destroy Warsaw.
Yeah, now we've got to
Well, I tell you what, I think this is one of the big problems facing Australia. And as you listen to that, the problem is you can argue different sides really cogently because there is no simple answer. Whatever happens here will be a 51-49 solution. Hope I can be on the side of the 51. I'll be back in just